Hello, everyone. Welcome to Leading with Agility, the show that uses the world around us to explore how leadership can be inspired by agility. As always, I'm your host, Arif, and I'm joined by...
Myself, TK, your reflective coach on the rocks.
Amazing. Thank you, TK. And thank you, as always, once again to our listeners for joining us on another episode of Leading with Agility.
Yep.
Can't wait to get stuck in. What are we talking about today, TK?
So, a bit of context, right? So, I don't know if you knew, but March the 21st is the World Down Syndrome Day.
Interesting.
And yeah, well, it's important to talk about these things as we talk about many things. And what I was exposed to is the Canadian Down Syndrome Society, CDSS, released a very thought-provoking video titled "Assume That I Can." And we will link it in the podcast description. So
Amazing.
I'm wondering if you've been exposed to this campaign of theirs.
Well, I hadn't until you mentioned it before this episode.
Damn it. You're revealing the fourth wall. But as you've been, and I'm hoping that many of you have seen it, because it has been, I guess, quite eye-opening for me, and I think it's really well done. And so just to quickly describe what this is, and I encourage everyone to watch it. It's essentially very skillfully illustrates the serious challenges for people with Down syndrome and provides a solution. So essentially, in the video, what happens is various people are making assumptions about people with Down syndrome that they can't do certain things, and thus they're not being offered opportunities to do these things. And following that, because they're not being offered the opportunities, these assumptions that people make become true. And this phenomenon has a name: self-fulfilling prophecy.
Ah, so that's where it comes from.
That's where it comes from, right?
Yeah.
Because people make these assumptions, make this prophecy the thing. And, you can watch it. But what it inspired me to think about, as, we're not necessarily experts with the problems that this organization is dealing with, people with Down syndrome.
Of course.
But what I think is interesting is this phenomenon definitely happens in the world of work and leadership.
Nice.
And I wanted to talk about it today.
Interesting. Yeah. There's probably lots to think about, lots of ways we can approach this. So yeah, let's get into it. Thank you, TK. Thanks for setting ourselves up for today's episode. How do we start the conversation? What's the important thing to share with our listeners as we dive into the episode?
Well, essentially, if you look at the self-fulfilling prophecy, and if you look at it through the lens of leadership, about what leaders do, how they make assumptions about people, I would like to talk about two kinds of or subdivisions of the self-fulfilling prophecy. And the first one is the golem effect.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, it says, I haven't heard about it until I did some research. The other one I've heard about, what we'll talk about later. So the golem effect is a psychological phenomenon where low expectations placed on individuals leads to poorer performance.
Wow.
And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy where negative beliefs about someone's potential hinder their actual achievement. Does that sound familiar, Arif?
Well, yeah, I think I can believe that. It's a research-based phenomenon, isn't it? So
and we'll link resources, of course.
Of course, as always. So I'm sure the esteemed scientists who've researched this and all the academics who put this together, have got all the evidence behind it. So, but when you describe it like that, I can really, I can believe that. I mean, there's probably elements of this that you can see in your own, maybe even for some people, their childhood, even, I'm sure, not even just working life, and being a parent, it is myself. I can see how some of that could happen quite easily, where, you may have varying thoughts and feelings towards, whether your child's capable of doing something, and will they ever get there? Will they ever become so and so? Those are natural thoughts and feelings. But hearing it in this way, as you've described it, it's quite an important reminder about how that can translate into the other person and how they believe in themselves, how they perform. Earlier we did an episode on where we talked about this whole phenomena of insecure overachievement, and that has its
we did.
legacies in childhood. So that there's some slight link there, but to your question, I can definitely believe it. I can understand it. I can appreciate what this means, and I think, as you said, we're talking from a leadership point of view or a organizational perspective in the working environment. I can relate to my own working experience, and where I had line managers who I suppose were the ones pushing or provoking or encouraging me to, perform even better, as opposed to other line managers who were not doing that, and perhaps for whatever reason, interested in maintaining status quo, and it wasn't natural to them, or they were not interested, or I never got that feeling that they wanted to encourage me to be even better, or that I could be better, right? I remember one particular experience I had that ended in redundancy, unfortunately, but that manager, was someone who it was more important that I was performing to some expected level in terms of doing what he thought I should be doing, but I never had a feeling that he really believed that I could be something else, or I could be even more than what I was. Those type of conversations were very, very, I always felt difficult to have, because it was always like I was being watched, I was being monitored, I was being I was working in a place where it was like, it wasn't so much about you progressing and doing better, but it was, have you passed my test of capableness to do the job? Even though, by that point, that feeling persisted for well over a year. So yeah, I can totally empathize and appreciate with this phenomena. It's debilitating, I think.
It is. And actually, this is interesting because what you've mentioned also happens in a different environment. And, parents definitely know a thing or two about it, because it happens a lot in school systems. And it's essentially, it's called the labeling theory in education. So what happens is, based on their experiences, even great teachers, and especially the ones that are experienced, sort of, unfortunately, and I'm hoping that, my experience is quite limited, but, you might we'll put the link to the labeling theory in education as another research phenomenon. Essentially, we're being labeled as, possible high achievers or not really. And sadly, the story you're telling is someone possibly, wrongfully, obviously, as we all know, has labeled you in a certain way, and there you go, right? It's the label has stuck. And this is an interesting thing. And in here, we're not talking about leadership in any other particular way than people leadership. So this is what you've mentioned about, being a parent, or in this case, being a people leader or being a teacher. Essentially, if you're listening to this podcast and you hear about these effects, I'm sorry to maybe bother you a bit, but it just proves how much responsibility we have for other people and how our behavior as leaders, even you could say, well, what is it to me, right? I'm not expecting much of this guy, but he has the freedom to perform any way he wants, right? It's not my problem.
Exactly.
A leader might say that, but this effect would basically bring a person down. As you said, debilitating.
That's fascinating. Yeah. I think I don't know what the research says, but I wonder how much of this is obviously, I don't know if it's subconscious, but your leaders being unaware or ignorant of their behavior or the impact of their behavior. I think it's probably the best way of describing it.
Who's the one that's supposed to teach them, right? Us, obviously, humble.associates, www at the front. Just joking. The ad slot is later on, but not really. But also, coaches like ourselves, great leaders, being raised in a good home that you're being taught these things. But I would say it's unfortunately a minority. Many people are not being taught that, right?
Yeah.
We have a certain model of leadership in our mind, and if it doesn't necessarily include the impact we can have on others, not just about what I say, but even expectations subconsciously that we can have. Yeah, and in fact, when I spoke about Golem effect, you can all in your hearts think about how many of you have heard this term. You might have heard about this self-fulfilling prophecy, but really reflect on what's happening there. But there's more, Arif, I think.
Yeah.
What I wanted to talk about is what you've mentioned is what I would call a performance expectation, right? So a manager expects a certain level of performance from an employee. Let's talk about people management, people leaders, obviously other kinds of leaders, but let's leave that aside.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that performance isn't important, but for agile leadership, a different expectation is also important and quite crucial, which is expecting people to make decisions for themselves, expecting people to understand the wider context, essentially expecting people to be leaders in their own right. Now, I would say many, a great majority of leaders don't really have this expectation from the people that look up to them for leadership.
Fair point. I think you're making a good point there. And that performance point you mentioned earlier, that 100% is how I was feeling. That was the experience I had. And you mentioned, going back to the other sectors, educationally, right? As you mentioned earlier, I can think of definitely occasions where there were some teachers I had who I was very comfortable with, or I enjoyed. I think we all can think of that, right? Even all of our listeners can imagine back in childhood, going to school, you enjoy some lessons, you wouldn't enjoy others, and I think it was natural. You got a feeling, you would have a feeling of which teacher probably liked you more than the other, for whatever reason, or there was always that perception that they prefer some of the other kids, or there's always that kid who always gets, he puts their hands up and they always get to answer quicker than you, or you get ignored in class. All of that stuff, right? We've all had those kind of experiences, and it has an impact which you don't really appreciate the ramifications of at that time. And now I think about some of that as well, and I think about certain, or not say certain, educationally, I had a bias towards certain subjects as opposed to others. And the ones that I didn't really enjoy were the ones I never really performed well at. And part of the reason I didn't perform well at was it was like this feeling of, you don't get it, you're not smart enough for that anyway, so don't waste your time kind of thing.
Oh, man.
So that's the thing.
It's a difficult one.
Yeah, so it's fascinating, this whole conversation, how it plays out in different settings.
So it does. And as we're sharing stories from childhood, like I got my early education in Poland, and, it doesn't really matter. It's just in Poland, you have something called a high school. I was at a technical high school, and you stay there, up until you go to university.
Yeah.
And I remember I never had good grades because I never felt like I needed to have good grades. I never had the ambition of good grades. I never saw the need, and I could just scrape by doing other things that I was interested in, right? Not thinking about leadership at that time, but, other things. So what was very interesting is, as I was ending school and I wanted to get into the university, I discovered that it won't be that easy. So I need to prepare for exams. I need to up my game because, well, I'm not going to scrape by and, have a great education that I wanted to have for this particular university I wanted to get into. So I really started working hard. And I can't, for the lot of me, forget the faces of my teachers when I suddenly made this huge leap from very poor grades to suddenly being very successful academically. And they were like, what the hell is happening with this guy? We've labeled him as like, good for nothing. And suddenly he's coming up with A's and knows maths and everything. I was like, well, now I need to learn this for the exam. It's like, well, it's not that difficult. I didn't consider that at the time. I was just lazy. It's just interesting to see people's cognitive dissonance, which is possibly another episode of our podcast. But getting back to the world of work, it's different, obviously, because as children, we're still developing, right? So we can't necessarily be expected to have the same behaviors as fully developed adults, if such a thing does exist. But assuming that it does, the challenge that I've seen is many leaders, even if they have high performing people that look up to them for leadership, still believe that these particular, even high performers, are not capable of making decisions for themselves, being self-guided, partnering on strategic decisions, all these kinds of things. So what happens is we get micromanagement, we get managers like really keeping people in the dark. We get top-down Tayloristic management, and it's not something that is conducive to like the topic of self-management that we talked about before, which is the basis of agile leadership. So I would say if you're a leader that wants to lead people in an agile way and have this self-managing, high-performing team, you have to expect people to take on these self-guided responsibilities. And if you by chance think that they're incapable of doing that, it will show and they will suffer from the Golem effect, even if they had some natural talent towards that.
Wow, that's fascinating. Really
fascinating. I've seen that happen, right? It's like, bright, very intelligent and capable, high performance. We're just sitting silent, right? I think, this is what happened with the Challenger disaster back in the 80s, where you've got a meeting in NASA where there's like a quality engineer, and I'm sure the similar thing happened in Boeing when we've previous episodes, right? When you've got these people and the expectation is they don't know what they're talking about, these quality people, so they just sit there and be silent because the Golem effect played a part, and instead of them taking responsibility for quality, which is their job, they're being labeled as, good for nothings, just raising problems, and they just shut up. And there we go, right? We're pushing them into these meek people that are not able to contribute as they should.
Fascinating. I mean, I think listening to you describe it and then having this conversation and we've shared our own experiences as well. Like, I'm thinking like you wouldn't even know, like thinking back with my experience, your experience, whatever, whether it's education or work, right? You wouldn't have known that this was what was going on, right? So I don't know. Are we going to talk about it now or maybe later on about like how do you know that, or even consider that this may be what's going on, that there is an effect playing out here
as a leader?
Sorry.
As a leader, I guess, or as a person that's being affected by that.
I think both, isn't it? Both.
Yeah, that's a good question, right? Yeah. But, as a leader, I think, as always, you probably need to look in your heart of hearts, and say, what do you really think about this person? Yeah. What's your genuine intention? Not what you're saying, what you're doing, but deep down in your heart, what is it that you're judging the person as? Right. And this is interesting from the perspective of like a professional coach, for instance. Because there is a demand that you treat a person as, fully capable, talented, and able to solve their own problems. Do you really believe that? And this is an open question, obviously, but you have to ask yourself this question constantly. And if you don't, it's a reflection because it will show up. Now, it's probably not a good idea to punish yourself if you judge someone negatively. But you have to be, I guess, conscious about that, don't you?
Yeah, you do. Yeah. But that's the thing, is the consciousness bit, I think, is what...
Yeah, the reflection there.
Yeah, it's the reflection, isn't it? And but maybe it's what type of questions you need to be asking yourself to make that consciousness I say a peer or.
Do you really believe that this person is capable
Yes.
of being a leader like yourself?
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Do you really believe that this person is a highly contributing person that can pull their own weight? Do you really believe this and that? Right? Ask yourself this question. If you're lying to yourself, well, the choice is yours. But you're not helping your situation, and you're not helping the overall performance of your organization, however you want to define it.
I think there's also something to be said. Okay, there's the reflection bit. There's also an organizational challenge here, which is whether you're in HR, you're in people development, or, whatever your position is. If you're one of those skills, if that's what your main role is, then I think it's about the educational awareness of this type of phenomena, or at least the educational awareness of, hey, manager or leader, the way you consider your employees or you view them has a direct effect in how you then treat them, which then has other effects in terms of how those employees feel about you and their work. So, really need to be much more conscious of your language and your style, being more empathetic, all of that good stuff, right? But I think there is something to be said for what I mean is people leaders, HR, people development, or if you're in that type of position about, okay, how are you engaging your leadership and having this type of conversation? How are you making them more aware and cognizant of this type of phenomena and the impact it can have?
And as you're here listening to us, because otherwise you're not hearing us logically, you're part of the way there, because you can always point them to our podcast, right? Which hopefully will, and if we're doing a good job in terms of explaining it to you, hopefully you feel this will also be a great material for them to listen to. And just one more thing, like you might have heard about the McGregor's theory X and Y, right? With the theory X, the management style assumes that a typical worker has little ambitions, avoids responsibility, and its individual goal is oriented for themselves, and in general they just believe that employees are just lazy, unintelligent, and so on, right? So if in your heart of hearts there's some belief that theory X exists and certain people are theory X people, all the models are wrong, some are useful, but this one is, if you have some belief there, the golem effect is going to get you, which is then going to get the people that are looking up to you for leadership. And correct. I don't think you will enjoy the results.
No. Amazing. On that note, I think we'll take a break, TK, and we'll come back in a moment and see where we go next. Thank you. Are you looking to create a brand new leadership style for your organization? Our flagship Leading with Agility development program is designed with that in mind. Through a structured 3-month program, leaders will discover what it takes to demonstrate agile leadership while receiving dedicated one-to-one leadership coaching. So visit our website today, humble.associates, and get in touch to see how we can help your leaders become agile leaders. Welcome back, everyone. And before the break, we were talking at length about the so-called golem effect, and if you are in a position of leadership, how it may affect the people around you, or more importantly, the people you lead. TK, where are we going next in our conversation? Because I think it'll be interesting to explore other perspectives on this, right?
Yes, indeed. I've promised 2 perspectives, so I have the second one for you.
Yes.
And as always, I have a fancy name, the Pygmalion effect.
Pygmalion effect, okay.
Yes,
right.
Yes. There is a Greek myth, I think, about, but I won't go into details. Essentially what it is, and again, links in the description to the theory, it denotes a psychological phenomenon wherein high expectations induce improvements in performance in a certain field. Oh my God, complete opposite.
It's the opposite.
Yeah, it's another subdivision of the self-fulfilling prophecy, where actually having high expectations of someone will result in improvement. So, for instance, it is this. Yeah, I've seen it. It can lead to exquisite results. In fact, this is the basis of the agile leadership style. Whereas you put high expectations and you believe in people, truly believe in people. And it's also fundamental in professional coaching. We believe that people have all the skills and resources to improve on their situation, and they do.
Yeah, that I think that fundamental aspect around people inherently wanting to do something good, positive, or coming to the working environment, wanting to improve and be better, and are already motivated, and all of that good stuff, right? That is what I assume is what we're talking about here with the Pygmalion effect.
Well, I think it's also something else, right? They don't have to come to work being motivated. They can have a difficult time at home, health issues, and just like maybe the work is just unattractive. I can tell you a story about, a person I worked with, and they haven't necessarily been that happy about, the work itself, right? We worked in a area. It was in a bank at that time, and someone had to do the job, right? Sometimes there's these things that just have to be done, and this person, picked up this area. I think they were working on monitoring. It's very ungrateful type of work, right? But it had to be done. So it was clearly demotivated, and I did my best to help. So when we organized the way we worked, I've introduced, can't remember the name now. I think we've called it area owners, right? So suddenly, instead of, having, in the way we worked, we had like one person, you might have heard the term product owner, but we thought, this doesn't necessarily work. We've introduced the term area owners, which is, we then said to a couple of people, we asked for volunteers, and we asked, okay, who would like to own this area, right? Be responsible for this area of the system or the delivery they were working on. And this person said really wasn't really up to it initially, but then I said, to the person, look, right, I think you're quite talented. I think you've learned a lot about that. I think you would do great as an area owner of this particular area of monitoring. And just me saying that, and I'm not putting some special talents on me, but I've seen a huge shift in this particular person. He suddenly became motivated. He found reasons to invest into learning about this. He found how this could be useful. I was just so surprised. I always knew he was capable of that, but I was surprised by the pace of him turning his particular attitude. And, I'm not saying his attitude was wrong. I can fully appreciate how it was difficult for him, but I was just astonished.
Wow. Amazing. It's really interesting. I think, but probably part of that was maybe he was just waiting for one person to, recognize that he's capable. And I think the fact that you had that conversation maybe was just the spark he was waiting for. To say, you know what? Yeah, I should believe in myself. I am capable. I can do this.
Yeah, someone pushed me over the edge, right? Like gave me a nudge, gave me this feather light encouragement that I was so starving for. And I don't know if that happened. I might have to speak to him again and ask, what was the experience from his perspective. Sadly, I left this particular arrangement not long after this had happened, but it definitely left an interesting impression on me. And there's other stories. I was wondering, Gareth, if there's any stories like this from your personal or work experience.
I'm sure I can think of examples where, like I've worked with someone who's probably maybe a bit more junior or doesn't have the same level of experience, and you're having almost like a mentor relationship, and you're encouraging them and that kind of good stuff, right? And that just requires. I've worked with some junior people like that, and just you being there, supporting them, and having those type of conversations can really help them, encourage them. And then there are other people who, you may have had some fleeting work relationship with, where they were part of your team, and they did some cool stuff. You developed a good relationship. Then you moved away and did something else, and then you meet them or you see them many years later, and you see they've now excelled or accelerated, and they've clearly had that experience that you had with them may have had some spark that caused them to do even better in their work. But what was interesting when I was listening to this from you, and when before we started recording today's episode, I was laughing to myself slightly, and some of our listeners may have picked up on this. I don't know, but something came to me. There's this current phenomena going around of this idea of manifesting. Now, I don't know if you've heard this.
Okay, no, that's a new one. That's off the script. Go on.
Yeah, I don't think this has any. I don't believe. Sorry, it has any research-backed or evidence-backed basis to it. But it's an interesting phenomena that is occurring. I don't know if it's in a particular generation, but it's certainly something I've seen more within the Gen Z generation. The idea is basically like, you will things to happen in your own life.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you have some ideas and beliefs about your own life, what you want it to be, and you have this mental strength of this is going to happen for me, and then somehow it happens. And
yep, a self-fulfilling prophecy
yes,
by definition, isn't it? Right?
It is.
It's a different name.
Can
also be negative.
But the interesting thing is, so it's becoming very popular, but there's like the double-edged sword to it, where people there's almost this mocking attitude towards it, where it's like, how can you just imagine something's going to happen, right? You're avoiding doing the hard work, or you're avoiding doing something to make that happen. Apparently there was a recent study, according to the British Psychological Society, found that support for manifestation was fairly common. 35% of a random selection of adults claiming some belief in this kind of idea. So it's definitely got some popularity. It's like on TikTok, it's trending, that kind of stuff. And there are people who are trying to monetize it or make something out of it, create some, methods. Oh yeah, I can teach you how to manifest your ideas, right? That kind of stuff. Where then this is where it gets a bit grey, and it's a bit like, not sure this is an ethical or quite correct way of approaching this, mental perspective on life. But yeah, there's a link to it somehow for me. It was just something interesting where it's become this popular, and apparently it has increased in popularity, especially after the pandemic. So there's probably something to say for that.
Vulnerable people are unfortunately the best to be taken advantage of. Number one. Number two, selling easy solutions is something that sells very well. Whatever, right? I love these like muscle activating belts or pills to get you in good shape. Yeah, they sell really well. Mm-hmm. Still, throughout history, like snake oil is always here, just changed its name. It is what it is, and it will always be that due to human nature. Everyone wants to, a get-rich-quick scheme.
That's the thing.
Been there for thousands of years, right?
That's the thing. But the root of it is probably, as you said, it goes back to the same point about self-fulfilling. And apparently, the quote was made famous by a Australian television producer and author named Rhonda Byrne, who basically, she published a self-help book, and in there, and this is 2006, so this is going back a number of years, and she, the quote was, "Your whole life is a manifestation of the thoughts that go in your head." Okay, that's not terribly wrong thing to say, given the conversation we've been having, I suppose.
Yeah, I think it is, right? As long as we also understand that just because we're capable is just the first step.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's not the most wrong thing to say,
whatever we want to make, as long as we're not making the wrong decisions.
Yeah.
And thinking that there's necessarily a lot of easy ways. There's always something, but it's probably a different podcast episode about how we fall into these traps. There's another trap I wanted to talk about, however, which is if you apply the Pygmalion effect. and really, get and praise people, you can get to another phenomenon, which is called the Peter's principle, which is, a hierarchy strand to promote people to the respective incompetence. Essentially, what happens is you can hype people up, and it's maybe due to, quite close to your manifestation point, which is you hype people up so much that they believe that they're invincible. And sadly, they might have still a lot to learn. And it can be quite hurtful when it comes to leaders, right? So you hype up and promote leaders just because you give them positive praise, which is not always grounded in reality. And then they believe it, and the decisions they make they may perpetuate this particular problem, right? So because they're not reflective, their self-image is hyped on the Pygmalion effect, we may end up in difficult situations of people making difficult decisions wrong because they believe in their own invincibility, where it isn't there.
So I suppose there's quite a responsibility for leaders then, in that sense.
Always.
Yeah.
That's the essence of leadership, isn't it? Responsibility.
Yeah. And in terms of, okay, you want to encourage, of course, you want to have full belief in the capability of your staff, etc. But I think it's more about then listening to what you're describing and how we've described this effect. It's more about the support. Are you providing the right framework of support for your staff and your employees so that they feel really comfortable, safe, that they can excel to wherever they get to, right? And so is it literally about the hygiene factors plus a bit more than that and making the environment really safe? And then that's enough for them to excel to wherever they need to get to without you having to overhype them.
I think, Arif, because I think if I can go back to the beginning of this podcast, which is amazing because we're getting a full circle there, which is people that, exhibit the behaviors and assumptions for people with Down syndrome, the lady says, oh, you assume I can't leave home, so you don't let me leave home and so on. You might say that you're being supportive. You're letting them off the hook. You're saying, oh, no, then we need to keep them safe because obviously they may not be as capable because of their condition, right? I think there needs to be more than that. I think instead of just providing hygiene, what we need to do is we need to be reasonable and use feedback based on actionable advice, the actual behaviors people are doing, and grounded in reality and proper numbers, or when it comes to performance and outcomes. Right? So instead of saying, oh, you can make it because you can manifest it and so on, you can say, well, I've seen you doing this and this. I've seen how you've interacted with this particular person. I think you've got it in you to actually lead this area. And also, I will support you if you make a decision to do so, and I will give you honest feedback. I'll offer my mentorship to you. And that's different, isn't it?
So it's more than, it's the additional kind of how else are you going to additionally support that person to achieve where their goals are and what they want to
stepping outside of their comfort zone. Yeah. That's the thing, right? And that's the interesting parallel to the video that we do encourage you to watch about these two effects and the self-fulfilling prophecy along with other psychological principles and phenomena we spoke about, and that's that.
I think there's two other things to reflect on as we come towards the end of our episode today, which is from that leadership responsibility point of view. The goal setting bit as well, right? Setting your team members or your people you're line managing goals that are high. Yeah, okay, realistic to an extent, but the goals, I think that's a co-creative aspect as well. It's not like you pass it to them, but having the right conversation about, where are your goals, where you're looking to get to, where you're looking to achieve in the next performance year, whatever it is, however the system works in your organization, making sure they're high enough, but also realistic enough, so that the person feels like, yes, there's something worth aiming for, but also then don't chop their legs off at the same time by not supporting them, as we've just discussed, right? So there's that needs to be part of what you described earlier, TK, around the supporting element, right? And then the other thing I think to add to that is, yes, praising and identifying, when they're doing well, and recognizing that and all of that, good recognition, all of that, but also providing critical feedback as well is important, I think, isn't it?
It is, and I think it's a
showing
great
them-
summary of today's episode, isn't it?
It is, yeah. Exactly, yeah. But that's what I would say in terms of providing the right feedback and giving them pointers or coaching conversation. What happened? What can you do differently? How can you be better, etc. Those kind of things to really help the person feel like, yes, this is in my gift. I can be better. I can get to where I need to get to. So,
and if you want to hear more about these things, let us know on LinkedIn or through any other means, maybe in a review. What is it that you like about these episodes? So you make sure that, they're always a great listen for you.
Brilliant. Excellent. That's a great way to end our episode today, TK. Thank you. And we will see you at a future episode. Thank you very much and have a good day.